America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
Welcome back to Only in America. I'm Ali Nirani, and I want to thank you so much for joining today's conversation. It's kind of a bittersweet conversation because if you haven't heard, I am planning on leaving the National Immigration Forum this spring, and it has been an incredible 14 years of working with just an incredible set of staff and board members, and just a tremendous honor to work on this incredibly important issue. But as part of this transition, we've made the bittersweet decision to end this podcast only in America. You know, we started this podcast back in 2017 with the goal of really trying to get beyond the immigration headlines, to share the stories of people whose lives have been touched by immigrants or by immigration. And well, 208 episodes later, 208. We've learned so much more than we could have ever expected. And, you know, quite frankly, I know I have learned so much more than I could have ever expected. You know, we've had conversations with Kumail Nanjiani and his wife, Emily Gordon.
Firstly, we just wanted to make a really good TV show. We wanted it to be entertaining, and we wanted to, from the beginning, we were like, we want to have a show where it's an anthology. So we really wanted every episode to feel completely different. And we wanted to just really entertain people. And we wanted it to sort of be everything that entertainment can be, which is we wanted some to be funny, we wanted it to be thrilling, we wanted it to be moving, we wanted it to be inspiring, we wanted it to be scary. And then we were also excited about telling the kinds of immigrant stories that you don't generally see in American pop culture. You know, generally in American pop culture, no matter what side of the immigration debate you're on, when you hear the word immigrant, most of America gets a certain image in their head, right? No matter what side of the debate you're on. And we wanted to show that when you think of the word immigrant, there should not be an image in your head because there really isn't like the, you know, ideal form of an immigrant or anything. Every immigrant has a completely different story. So we wanted to show that too. We wanted to show that immigrants have all kinds of experiences in America. It's not just the usual sort of really, really stories of struggle and strife. And I think those stories definitely have place, you know, those stories are very valuable, but we wanted to show different stories.
The chef, Pati Jinich, and how she brings the stories of Mexican cuisine to households across the country.
I think that cooking and food is really the most open and noble space where you can get to know the other and the foreign and the immigrant. Because with food, you're hungry, you want to eat it, like your walls come down. Because we're animals too, you know? So I find that it's the place that allows for the most communication. So I guess I just want to show the humanity.
And Nafy Flatley, a immigrant chef in San Francisco.
So I started thinking, and then I started making the juices that we were making back home, and then have friends try them. And actually I used to have them even when I was in college, you know, friends and family, when they have potlucks and invitations to certain events. And people used to always tell me, Nafy, these are so delicious, these are so good, you should definitely make a business. But for me, my brain was just completely shut off. It wasn't just, I said, oh no, this is just things I grew up with, eating, drinking. It's really good. I just love using it as a participation, you know, and stuff. And so as I started making them more and more, showing it to people, people were really telling me, you should definitely do this as a business, you know. It will support you, it will make you stay home more and, you know, take care of your family and things like that. So I started to look into how do I start my own business.
You know, heck, we even did 2 episodes with my mom where she didn't just teach me how to cut a mango properly, but shared the stories of our family's immigrant journey.
We were very, very fortunate. We met some very nice people who helped us a lot and been friends for life. Grandma Mary and Grandpa Leonard. They lived in Santa Cruz for so many years in Bakersfield. They'd never been to the city, to San Francisco. And so when we went for our citizenship, orals or whatever, the requirement was you have to bring 2 citizens with you to vouch for you. So Grandma Mary and Grandma Leonard went with us.
Really?
Yeah.
This is their first trip.
Their first trip to San Francisco. They had never been to San Francisco.
So these are, I mean, just a little context. These are migrants from Oklahoma who had a farm in Oklahoma, who spent years in Bakersfield, ended up living across the street from you in Santa Cruz, and they were your witnesses at your naturalization test. And so many other episodes along the way have just been so much fun. You know, we've had an opportunity to talk to folks, you know, in the South and the northern parts of the country. For my upcoming book, Crossing Borders, had some amazing conversations that I shared with you with leaders in Croatia and in Honduras. And each conversation, I know I took away something that I hope made the National Immigration Forum a better organization. And we hope we helped all of you understand this issue of immigration just a little bit better. It's just been incredibly humbling to hear these stories, and to all of our guests, I just really want to say thank you so much for sharing them with us. But, you know, this has been a team effort since the beginning. So on this last episode of Only in America, wanted you to hear from some of the folks who really make this show happen, who, in spite of working with, let's be honest, some, you know, not the best talent in terms of a host, but just incredible folks behind the scenes that I'm going to turn this episode over to right now.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm the digital production manager at the National Immigration Forum.
I am Joanna Taylor. I am Senior Communications Manager at the National Immigration Forum.
I'm Becca Wall. I'm the Vice President of Digital Communications at the National Immigration Forum. So to kick off kind of thinking about the last episode of Only in America, we reached out to a lot of our former colleagues and former co-producers on the podcast. And our colleague Megan Whitmore, who produced a lot of episodes through 2020, from 2017 to 2020, really, when we asked her what her favorite episode was, she said that really what stuck out to her through all the great stuff that we did was our series, How Did We Get Here?, where we looked at the past histories of immigration reform over the past 100 years, and specifically the episode where we talked to Jialin Yang, who really wrote a book about these issues and wrote a book about the history of immigration reforms. To me, that really stuck out. I thought that was such a great example of the range that the podcast has, because I feel like it's such a great space to have these bigger conversations and to dive deep into very specific topics. I remember joking at the time that we were producing that series that it felt very like a very podcasty series, like we're going to dive deep into this very niche part of American history. But it was really interesting and also kind of helped us feel like we were giving folks the background they needed to understand not only what's happening in Congress today, but how 100 years of history and 100 years of reforms and advocacy have informed the work that we do today.
I think you have to know this history to understand what's happening right now, because people like Stephen Miller know this history. Yeah. You know, you can see it. There's like little cookie crumb hints, that he and Jeff Sessions know the history. You'll see in passing in interviews, they will refer to the 1924 quotas, they'll refer to 1965. And for them, these are kind of like the twin poles of American immigration history. 24 being a high point of asserting kind of the white ethnic identity root of America and codifying that in immigration laws, and 65 as kind of the beginning of the end, where people let their foot off the gas and allowed all this immigration to be sort of rampant and rampantly non-European. And I think for them, they want to get back to the 20s. And so I just think if you're going to be engaging in this current debate, you need to know, first of all, what they have in their heads. And I've been surprised at how little people on the other side of the debate know this history.
It also made me think about the work that we did. We produced 2 episodes in the past couple of years with Alan Cross, who we work with on our team and who has written really great works on race and religion. And we had a great conversation with him called Racial Justice and Immigration in September of 2020, kind of, as Black Lives Matter and the resurgence of that movement was a top conversation for the country. And it was really great to have a conversation with somebody as opposed to just, as somebody who works in digital, I see a lot of social media posts, a lot of emails, a lot of one-way communication about racial justice. And it was really, really cool to have a conversation that felt very two-way, very open, very non-judgmental, but clear and with moral clarity about what we were trying to communicate and what we were trying to do in having this conversation. And that was one of my favorite podcast episodes that we did. And as well as the, Great Replacement Theory podcast episode we did just this past December, where we talked about the dangerous rise of the Great Replacement Theory and the history behind it. And, Alan just had so many great and concise thoughts about how we can fight back up against this in our communities that, again, felt very open and two-way and non-judgmental. And that's the kind of stuff that creates the cultural change that we need to pass these reforms, to change the way we think about these issues. And that was my favorite things that we've done.
So wait a minute, there's more to this than just to deport everybody. There's more to this than the law is the law. There are ways that people have been affected by this, and how do we address it from a perspective of compassion and love? And then that fuels our view of justice, right? If this person is a victim of a system, then how do we make it right for them? And so that's what I go through. And I've had to work through this on all these issues because I come from a conservative perspective and background where I do believe in the rule of law and I do believe in borders, and all those things I think are important if they're dealt with the right way. But then how do they play out? We had asylum seekers come, and when you first see the caravans, you have a reaction. What are they trying to do? And then you realize, well, they're coming to apply for legal asylum. The law allows for that. So how do we treat them in that process? And so for me, I know this isn't for everyone, but for me, I start with I try to, the cross of Christ and what does it mean to love your neighbor sacrificially? And then I apply that into the policy sphere. And there are differences and people see it differently. I understand that. But that's where we can talk about it. And that's where we can hopefully work through it and hopefully be at a better place than just fighting with each other and distrust and all that.
Yeah, this is very funny. After having, worked here since the podcast started, but also having edited it for the past 3 or 4 years, I'm so conscious of the certain ways people talk or the things they'll say that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to edit that. They popped a P or they did whatever. And then you realize once you start talking, you're like, oh no, I probably do all of these things. It's very strange to be on the other side. So that's just an apology to anyone who I've ever in my head gotten mad at about their audio quality. I'm sorry. I understand the pain now. But yeah, so I asked Kathleen Farrell, who's our former comms director, what her favorite episode was. She was really instrumental in kind of getting this off the ground. I remember having these sort of giant, those giant white kind of papers that stick to the walls and you write on them in marker. We just had one up in Ali's office that was full of these name ideas before we settled on Only in America. And it doesn't feel like 5 years ago, but it was almost 5 years ago. So I talked to her and I asked her kind of what her favorite episode was. And she wrote back with this incredible list of 25 episodes, which I think is just a really good indicator of how broad the range of guests that we've heard from over the past few years is. And she wrote, I can't name just one episode. I think taken together, these episodes were a marvelous, warmly human, inspiring way to tell the story. So I totally agree with everything she said. And a couple of the episodes that she listed really stood out to me because they were some of my favorites as well. So for example, the poet Jose Olivares, who's from Chicago, he shared this really intimate kind of story of his identity and his art. And I think that was just really refreshing to share this side of immigration stories and bring something like poetry into our advocacy space. I don't think it's something we touch on a lot, but it's really powerful. And really connects the issue for people to their own experiences.
My family never finished migrating, we just stopped. We invented cactus. To survive the winters, we created steel. At my dad's mill, I saw a man dressed like a Martian walk straight into fire. The flames licked his skin, but like a pet, it never bit him. In the desert, they find our baseball caps, our empty water bottles, but never our bodies. Even the best ICE agents can't track us through the storms. But I have a theory. Some of our cousins don't care about LA or Chicago. They build a sanctuary underneath the sand, under the skin we shed, so we can wear the desert like a cobija, under the bones of our loved ones, bones worn thin as thorns to terrorize blue agents, bones worn thin as guitar strings, so when the wind blows, we can follow the music home.
So I really loved it. I actually went out and bought his book as we were working on the episode. It's called Citizen Illegal. It's really good. I highly recommend it. And another one I love that Kathleen mentioned was Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. She's a pediatrician from Flint, Michigan. So she helped identify and bring attention to the Flint water crisis sort of as that all unfolded. And I think that was just a really, really inspiring story and kind of clearly connected like the focus of our podcast, which is immigrant justice, to this broader vision of justice. And I think it kind of really spoke to like that determination to speak up for vulnerable communities and engage in democracy and this kind of idea of speaking truth to power. I think we often, you know, it gets perceived as this very sort of American value. It's very this all-American kind of freedom and, you know, speaking out against authoritarianism and really championing equality for everybody and justice for everybody. But that's really a value that's so often championed by immigrants. And I think often the most compelling sort of examples of them in modern society are people who either are currently, you know, considered the other or are from communities that have really been othered in American history. And so I think it really just connected that broader sense of justice in this really powerful way. And I think that's something, you know, just that our podcast was this really perfect vehicle for just letting these kinds of connections really speak through these stories.
It's our responsibility. It's our obligation to open our eyes and not only to be alert to these injustices that are happening all around us, but to act on them and to speak up and to do right, especially for our children. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you do or where you are, or even how long you've been in this country, whether you came here as an immigrant like me or your family's been here for centuries. It is all our obligation to do this work. I love to quote Martin Luther King, who said, no matter what ship brought you here, we are all in the same boat. So I definitely came on a different ship. But all of this work is all of the work that we have to do together. And my story and my message is, it also goes much broader than Flint because it resonates with what's happening right now in our nation. It's about really the deeper crises that we are facing in this nation. A breakdown in democracy. The reason Flint happened is we had lost democracy. We were under emergency management. It's about a disrespect for science. We see that right now where basic scientific facts are being attacked and disputed, from climate change to the regulations that protect our air and water quality at the EPA and what have you. It's about environmental injustices that are ongoing. It's about the breakdown of our infrastructure. But fundamentally, it's about how we care for each other and how we care especially for our children. So the lessons of Flint are the lessons of today. But despite all of these crises, the story of Flint is also this incredible story of almost a playbook of how to be an activist, how to be a resistor, and most importantly, how to provide hope in communities.
Storytelling, I think, is really kind of the basis of this podcast. And I think that one of the things that we've done really well is tell a lot of really good stories. And, one of the ways that we've told stories a couple times is of the southern border. And another one of our producers that worked on the podcast, Emily Chow, wrote in about one of her favorite episodes, which was called Demystifying Our Southern Border. And I'll just go ahead and read kind of what Emily had to say here. I'll have to say my all-time favorite is Demystifying Our Southern Border. It was our first time weaving together multiple interviews, news clips, and Ali's commentary to tell a narrative story about the reality of border life. I will also never forget how Ali completely disregarded our instructions to record interviews in a quiet place and jokingly told a guest in this episode that we can, quote, just edit it out. The screaming train in the background, insert laugh cry. I love that story just because I think that just speaks to kind of all the production and things that go into a podcast like this. But also, kind of what she touched on also is weaving together multiple clips and multiple stories to kind of come to a cohesive package. And I thought that this was also just such a great podcast episode because it really talks about the interactions with migrants and Border Patrol and how that's really a core of everyday life in border cities.
So we talk about misconception of the border. The reality is that there's these beautiful historical interchanges and exchanges between Sonora and Arizona that have existed before there was a border. Yeah. Because southern Arizona was at one time Sonora, Mexico. And even though a political line was imposed, that didn't necessarily change the cultural interactions, the family interactions, made it more difficult, and increasingly has become more difficult today. But those fundamentally rooted connections are there, they're permanent, they're not going anywhere, and they are screaming out loud that they need to be listened to. Mm-hmm. And as well as the Tohono O'odham people who live on the border. Their land is being intersected by physical barriers. Yeah. The environment is being destroyed along the border. And these issues really are not being addressed.
So that was such a great clip. And it also really made me think about one of my favorite episodes, which was called What's Happening at the Southern Border. This was actually an episode that I had the opportunity to go down to the southern border in Arizona. And I had the opportunity to speak with Joanna Williams, who is the executive director at Kino Initiative. And, you know, what she told me was just really interesting about just kind of all the work that they do, but also just like the very basic things that they offer some of these families that are also just life-changing services.
We at the border exist in this tension of hope and despair. And people come here in many ways because they're desperate, and as I said, it's because of their last option. And yet somehow in their persistence, there's also this grain of hope that I think about the moms, for example, who have crossed the border 5 times trying to rejoin their kids who are in the US. And they say, well, if I get deported 10 times, I'm going to try 11. And that kind of grit and persistence and resilience is something that inspires me, and I hope inspires anybody who's working towards change in immigration, to say, it's too easy to say, well, we've tried immigration reform so many times. What's the point? As long as these moms are still trying to get back to their kids, or as long as families are trying to get to safety, as long as the folks here are persisting and are resilient, then it's not my job and it's not anyone's job to give up on them. And so that's the invitation that I want to give to people, is to continue to persist, to continue to push, and in that, perhaps we can find hope.
Again, I just want to thank Joanna for letting us come down. And, you know, one of the things that I also remember about that episode is when I did go down to the southern border, and I had to park in this very specific place and then kind of walk across, and there's not signs. There isn't really a lot of information of how to get from the US to Mexico. And I even had to use kind of my broken Spanglish to even try to kind of understand how to get there and where it was and that kind of thing. And I had to ask a couple women who I just kind of followed. And so that it was really not hard to get over from the US to Mexico. Nobody checked my backpack or my passport. But when I was over visiting the Kino Border Initiative, everybody there was so nice and really loving and warm and helpful. And it really was just like a nice city. And I think that we need to do more to kind of demystify and kind of, you know, break out of these ways that we kind of perceive the border and people that live along the border. And, you know, I think that is something that we are going to be doing more. Even though this podcast is ending, that doesn't mean that we at the Forum are going to stop telling stories. If anything, we are doing more stories, and we're reinvesting in more ways to tell stories. And I think that this isn't the end. This is really just the beginning into how we're going to really elevate our storytelling at the Forum in the next couple of years.
So thank you so much to Kathleen Farrell, Emily Chow, Megan Wetmore, Katie Lutz, Joanna Taylor, Becca Wall, and everyone else at the Forum who has helped bring this podcast to life. And again, thank you to all of our guests for your time, your trust, and your generosity in sharing your experiences with us. And most of all, you know, thank you so much for listening to Only in America every single week. And this isn't the last time you'll hear from this amazing team at the National Immigration Forum. We've got a big year planned and lots more stories to tell. So be sure to follow the Forum on social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and stay up to date with our new projects. And you can find all of our past episodes, plus new resources and policy updates at immigrationforum.org. I'm Ali Nirani, and I want to thank you for listening to Only in America, and I will see you on the other side.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and strengthening international peace and security, and from Humanity United, When humanity is united, we can bring a powerful force for human dignity.